Inner realization begins where words fall short. It does not arrive as information, nor as something taught or transferred from one to another. It arises quietly, often in solitude, often in stillness. One does not chase it, but rather becomes quiet enough to notice it when it appears. Like the breeze that moves without a sound, inner realization is subtle, yet unmistakable in its presence. To recognize this realization, one must have cultivated inner awareness. It is not visible to the eye or graspable by the hand, yet its effect on the inner world is undeniable. It shifts the way one walks, breathes, observes. It transforms perception not by adding knowledge, but by dissolving illusion. Its power lies in what it unveils, not in what it declares. Those who receive such understanding must guard it gently. Speaking of it too soon often reduces its clarity. The moment it is shared without ripeness, it becomes an idea rather than a lived truth. What was once alive inside begins to turn into opinion, into debate, into performance. The essence starts to decay the moment it is used to impress rather than to embody. Sacred things require sacred treatment. Inner realization is not for display, not for decoration, and certainly not for applause. The more precious something is, the more protection it requires. One must first digest it, live with it, and allow it to integrate fully. Until it becomes part of the breath, part of the gaze, part of the silence between words, it is not ready to be spoken. There is a natural humility that follows true insight. It quiets the tongue and softens the posture, not because of fear, but because of respect. Not because one is unsure, but because one sees that what is within is far more vast than what can ever be said. The deeper the realization, the more reverent the silence that surrounds it. In many traditions, students are taught to observe before they speak, to feel before they form language. This is not to suppress, but to deepen. Speaking from a place of deep knowing requires patience. The unspoken realization is like a seed, protected in the soil, away from the harshness of exposure, growing quietly toward strength. The sacred is not loud. It does not demand attention. It sits in the stillness, waiting to be embodied. Those who rush to speak it often lose the connection. They give away what has not fully matured, and in doing so, diminish its effect not just for others, but within themselves. Silence in such a moment is not absence. It is protection. The mouth may remain closed, but the being begins to speak differently. The actions become precise, the presence becomes fuller, and the silence becomes charged. This is the language of realization, and it is far more powerful than any spoken word ever could be. Silence protects power because it prevents the unnecessary leakage of energy through words. When a person has discovered something profound, the initial impulse may be to share it, to speak it aloud, but in doing so, the raw intensity of that experience begins to dissipate. Like heat escaping through an open window, the warmth of the insight weakens when it is not held closely. Power that is spoken too soon becomes vulnerable. Others may misunderstand it, reject it, or misuse it. What was once pure becomes tangled in the reactions of others. Words cannot always carry the weight of what has been internally understood. They reduce, fragment, and sometimes distort. The more powerful the insight, the more easily it can be damaged by exposure. A silent mind retains energy like a still lake retains its reflection. It is not moved by external forces, and thus it preserves clarity. The act of holding silence around a truth is like allowing it to settle within the body. The longer it is kept inward, the deeper it roots itself. What remains unspoken has time to grow stronger and steadier within. In stillness, the insight has room to breathe. No need to defend, explain, or prove it. This inner confidence does not arise from arrogance, but from alignment. One does not need to be seen or heard to be certain of what is known. When silence surrounds power, it builds pressure like water behind a dam. That pressure can become focus, discipline, and resilience. There is wisdom in waiting. Not every truth needs to be shared immediately. Silence becomes the container that allows power to mature. Just as fruit must ripen before it is eaten, understanding must settle before it is spoken. Premature sharing is like cutting the fruit before its flavor has deepened. What is meant to nourish ends up being wasted. The ego often urges one to speak, to impress others with what has been learned. But power that is displayed too quickly serves the ego, not the spirit. Silence, on the other hand, starves the ego and strengthens the essence. It teaches patience, humility, and the quiet confidence that no applause can provide. When the time is right, even the smallest words can carry immense power. But until that time, silence serves as the guardian. It creates a space where the energy is not fragmented through conversation, but held intact. This is not silence out of fear, but silence born of respect for what has been entrusted to the inner being. True strength often moves without sound. Just as wind shapes the mountain without being seen, power held in silence influences life deeply without needing validation. It guides decisions, sharpens awareness, and fuels steady progress from within without drawing attention to itself. The ego seeks to impress because it is built on identity rather than essence. It craves validation to confirm its existence, relying on external reactions to feel secure. The more it is applauded, the more real it believes itself to be. It feeds on attention like a flame feeds on oxygen, always needing more to keep burning. This creates a cycle where value is measured not by depth but by display. In its constant need to be seen, the ego becomes loud. It pushes one to speak before understanding is fully formed, to teach before one has truly learned. It is not concerned with truth, but with appearance. It trades depth for visibility and wisdom for recognition. Even when it speaks of noble things, the motivation beneath it is often to stand out rather than to serve. Impression is a shallow victory. What impresses one day is forgotten the next. The ego chases this temporary validation endlessly, exhausting itself in the process. Instead of allowing silence to cultivate strength, it rushes to decorate itself with borrowed words, with half-formed insights, with hollow gestures. The result is noise that may sound confident but lacks the weight of true presence. When the ego is in control, even the most spiritual truths are used as decoration. The teachings become a performance. The silence that nourishes realization is broken not to share wisdom, but to collect approval. One quotes what they have not embodied, hoping that the echo of another's truth will add shine to their own name. This is not the way of inner growth, but the path of distraction. The ego avoids stillness because stillness reveals its emptiness. In silence, it cannot perform. In solitude, it cannot be admired, and so it seeks movement, words, audiences. It speaks not to clarify, but to occupy space. The more uncertain it feels, the louder it becomes. The voice rises not from power, but from fear of being unnoticed, unimportant, unseen. True knowing does not need to announce itself. When one has tasted depth, the need to impress fades naturally. There is nothing to prove. The presence alone carries the mark of transformation. But the ego, unfamiliar with this quiet strength, continues to chase applause as if it were nourishment, unaware that it is only chasing shadows on a wall. It is easy to confuse ego-driven expression with passion. But passion serves something greater, while the ego serves only itself. Passion speaks when needed with clarity and calm. Ego speaks constantly with urgency and pride. To distinguish between the two, one must cultivate awareness, not just of the words being spoken, but of the energy that drives them. To overcome the ego's need to impress, one must learn the discipline of restraint. To sit with insight without rushing to share it, to act without needing recognition, to practice without needing witnesses. In this space, power gathers quietly, and the ego begins to dissolve. No longer fed by the constant need to be admired, stillness deepens the truth because it allows the mind to settle, like sediment sinking in clear water. When the surface is agitated, what lies beneath remains hidden. But in moments of complete stillness, everything becomes visible. Truth does not shout. It waits in silence to be recognized. It is not created by the mind, but revealed when the noise of thought fades. In stillness, the truth is not something one reaches for. It is something one becomes aware of. The practice is not about adding more ideas, but about stripping away what obscures the essential. In this quiet, a person sees not only the world more clearly, but also themselves. Masks fall away, pretense loses its grip. What is real begins to emerge without force. The mind constantly seeks stimulation. It moves from one thought to the next, chasing distraction and avoiding discomfort. Stillness interrupts this pattern. It exposes the restless movements and demands of the mind, and in doing so, weakens their hold. With time, the turbulence quiets. In the stillness that follows, truth is no longer filtered through opinions, memories, or expectations. It is direct and unshaped. Stillness requires patience. One cannot force silence any more than one can force sleep. It must be invited, and it arrives when one stops grasping. In that surrender, the body softens, the breath deepens, and awareness expands. The truth that appears is not intellectual but experiential. It is felt more than understood, known more than explained. Depth does not exist on the surface. It requires going beneath the constant movement of the world and the mind. Stillness provides the descent. Each moment spent without reacting becomes a step deeper into clarity. The more time one spends there, the more familiar it becomes, and the less interest one has in shallow interpretations. Superficial answers lose their appeal in the presence of what feels true. Stillness is not the absence of action, but the presence of awareness. In stillness, every breath is observed, every emotion is allowed, and every thought is met without judgment. This attentiveness makes space for insight to arise organically. When the inner environment becomes quiet, it becomes fertile ground for wisdom to take root and grow without interference. The truth that arises in stillness is not meant to be explained, but to be lived. It guides actions, shapes perspective, and anchors the being. It doesn't need to be defended or discussed. Its presence is enough. One walks differently, speaks differently, chooses differently, not to convince others, but because something deeper has taken the lead. Just as the moon is reflected only in still water, truth can only reflect itself in a still mind. Turbulence distorts, movement distracts, but in stillness, truth becomes whole again, untouched by personal desire or external noise. Protection from misunderstanding begins with restraint. When something deep is realized, it is often fragile in its early stages. Like a flame in the wind, it can be extinguished by careless exposure. Sharing such insight too quickly invites distortion. What is spoken may not be what is heard, and what is heard may not be what is understood. The space between expression and reception is full of risk. Not every listener is prepared to receive what is sacred. A truth that took years to uncover may be reduced to opinion in the ears of someone not yet ready. Their reaction, even if unintentional, can cast doubt or confusion back upon the one who shared it. In this way, misunderstanding does not only live in others, it can affect the one who speaks. What was once clear becomes questioned. What was certain becomes shaken. To protect a realization is to allow it to mature. Keeping it inward gives it strength and structure. Like roots growing underground, it becomes stable before it emerges. If it is spoken before it is stable, it becomes subject to the judgments and projections of others. These projections, whether in the form of approval or rejection, can cause the original clarity to scatter. Misunderstanding often arises not because a message was wrong, but because the context was missing. A person may hear your words, but without your silence, your discipline, your path, they interpret it through their own lens. The result is not a shared understanding, but a fragmented one. Protection means waiting until your words carry the weight of your lived experience, not just your thoughts. There is wisdom in knowing when to speak and when to remain silent. A truth held in silence continues to nourish the one who holds it. It integrates itself into breath, posture, and presence. Over time, the need to explain fades. When something is truly embodied, even silence becomes a kind of speech, and misunderstanding is reduced not through explanation, but through the quiet radiance of authenticity. People do not always seek to understand. They often seek to react. They listen not to absorb, but to compare, to judge, or to respond. This tendency creates noise around something that should remain still. To protect an insight from misunderstanding is to shield it from being turned into argument, debate, or performance. It is to honor its sacredness by refusing to place it on display. Sometimes the most compassionate thing to do is to say nothing. Silence does not mean withholding. It means protecting. Protecting not only oneself, but also others from receiving something they are not ready to carry. Not all silence is distance. Some silence is respect, the highest form of recognition that something too deep for words should not be reduced by them. Protection from misunderstanding is not about fear, but about reverence. What is true does not need constant validation, but it does need space to breathe. A single word, spoken at the wrong time, can scatter what took years to form. In silence, that truth remains whole, untouched by misinterpretation, undivided by language, and unburdened by expectation.